You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
Just a story about my sister and my family. Can't think why I told you that.
You keep thinking about that, Ros.
Oh, yes. Joshua and your father. You were saying they fell out.
I never knew the details.
Because there were rumours.
There were always rumours.
Saying?
Ros, you look like a nice person. Is any of this worth going over now? We should leave the past where it is. It was a dramatic day, a time many have tried, prayed to forget.
Yes, but...
Oh, please. I have lived with the events of that day for the last 50 years, and there is not one day when the events of that day do not run through my mind. Can you imagine what it's been like to live like that? Once, a long time ago now, I sat in front of a computer and put Gerald's name into, what do they call these things? Search engines. So I did that, and the number of websites dedicated to that day, the strange ideas people had put forward. Gerald would have had to have shot from this angle, run to this point, hid behind that tree or those bushes. Was someone assisting him? How did he get to the waste ground in time? Or the one in the market? Over and over it went. One stupid idiot even dared to say it wasn't Gerald, but a whole group of archers sending arrows all over the place. Someone actually referred to it as arrows like a scene from Agincourt. Can you believe it? Oh, please, Ros. Leave it to the internet, the blogs, the TV programmes, anybody and everybody that thinks they've solved it, as if there is anything left to solve. Don't waste the time you have on this sort of thing. Nothing good can possibly come of it. Don't spend your time thinking about things before you were even born. Think about the world you will leave behind you. That is the real reason, I believe, that we are here, to leave the world a better place than the one we came into. So, as I was saying, it's time that...
Did Gerald feel that way?
We'll never know, will we? Because he's dead. I'm sure after your extensive research you found that out.
Yes. He cut his own throat. Which was curious when you think about it.
I know you want me to ask, but I'm not going to, Ros. It was all a very long time ago, and I've heard all of the weird and wonderful ideas and theories that have been put forward. Now I really am going indoors.
Gerald was left-handed, wasn't he?
After all this time.
He was left-handed.
If you say so.
So you'd expect the puncture wound to be deepest on the right-hand side of his throat. That would be the easiest.
You shouldn't fixate on these sorts of things. I've told you, it's not good for you.
But Gerald was different.
Was he?
Gerald, with his left hand, cut the left-hand side of his throat. It's unusual.
But not impossible.
People were understandably horrified. A culprit was suspected, everyone knew his face, there wasn't much investigating required, and justice appeared to have already been performed. Gerald was number 7, by his own hand, his left hand. Your parents must have been devastated.
I'm sure you can guess.
I'm guessing, and it is only a guess, you understand, that he might have been resentful of you.
Of me?
Why not? You were Mr. Popular. Outgoing, the one the other kids called for. I bet you were the first they asked for to be on their team. The one that got the lead in the school play, won all the races on sports day, the one I'm guessing had lots of girlfriends.
I don't know about that.
You don't know? Come on, George, you must have talked about girls. 2 lads sharing a room, teenagers, rampant hormones, first flashes of youth. Me and my sister talked about boys.
Did you?
Who had the better-looking boyfriend? Was he in the school football team? Things like that.
Right.
You know what it's like, sibling rivalry. Hey, I understand that only too well. My sister liked Catherine. She was born before me. And I noticed this. People always asked how she was doing. And do you know why? Because she was the oldest. That was the reason. I was after her, but she was the first. How is Catherine? What's Catherine doing now? What exams is Catherine doing? Is she seeing someone? Is she married? Has she any children? Always the same, year after year. The questions are always about Catherine, never about me. If I'm honest, George, I'd have to say that was, at times, I was a bit resentful. How often have any of us looked back on events and thought, I was a different person back then?
We all make decisions that we have then to live with. Sometimes we even delve into things that, to be honest with you, would probably be best left well alone.
I'm not...
If I think of all the years I spent worrying about one thing or another at work, lying awake at night over the latest problem created by people that never did the job or were even out there in all weathers doing the job, I came to the conclusion that it was nothing short of a complete waste of my time. To have given up so much of the one thing you never get twice, time, to someone else's worries, what a waste. I don't think you should waste any more time on...
Did Gerald wet the bed?
Ross?
Is that why the other boys made him walk home in nothing but his underwear?
And you learnt all of this from your next-door neighbour?
Oh, Mrs. Turnbull. No, not from her. She was only the starting point. I'm afraid to tell you, George, that Gerald has slightly fallen into obscurity. No one really talks about that day anymore. I mean, it was a big event in its day, but the world has forgotten. We've had so many mass killings these days that if you don't reach double figures, no one's going to be interested in writing a book about it. It's a bit sad, in a way. But there you are.
There you are.
Unless that is...
Unless what?
Well, and it's only a thought, George, but what if there was something else to talk about? Something new to say about that whole day? And those events that happened, or at least the events that people think happened.
Ros, you seem a nice person.
Have you ever met a nice person?
No.
Neither have I, George. I thought I had once, but that was only once. Most of us are not nice people, George. That's why the world is as it is.
I'm sure you're right. Now, I truly must...
Did Gerald have a girlfriend?
I've told you, he had very few. No real friends at all.
And you?
I had lots, if you must know.
That must have been odd.
Odd?
Yes.
Odd in what way?
To have one brother so popular, the centre of attention, the life of the party, and so on, and the other one on his own.
He wasn't completely on his own.
Oh?
He had me.
So you did things together? Went out? Joined clubs? Met girls?
No.
Aren't those the type of things that boys do? Especially teenage boys. Gerald can't have lived just in that bedroom of yours. He must have got out at some point, even if it was only to go to school.
He didn't like school.
Did he have a rough time?
I believe you know the answer to that.
He must have known someone.
He knew me. I was his friend. I was the one he talked to. There was no one else.
Wasn't that a bit stifling?
How do you mean?
For him, I mean.
I'd...
Stuck indoors, seeing no one, quite alone in some ways, hiding away from the world, whereas you...
What?
You were out with friends, girlfriends, the school football team. Popular, outgoing. How did he feel about that?
It was a long time ago, Ros. I cannot remember that far.
Because I can understand what it must have been like. Know how he must have felt.
Can you?
Let's think about it.
Oh, must we?
One brother seems to have everything. He's the one people gravitate to. He's the one people ask about. The one people are interested in, the oldest, the focus of attention. And like I said, I understand resentment. To always be second, to always be the other one, to know you'll never be first. It can be hard to forge your own identity, to be taken seriously, to stand out on your own. Because we all do, don't we? We all want to be seen for what we ourselves contribute to the world. Like you said, do we leave this planet a better or a worse place than when we arrived? I guess the question has always been how to do it. Because we can't all find a cure for some disease now, can we? We're not all going to walk on the surface of the moon, or maybe even Mars these days. The Titanic is still out of reach for most of us. And how many of us truly want to stand on the summit of Everest? Few of us will ever win an award for anything. If we win a tenner on the lottery, most of us consider that to be a good day. So how can we make the world a better place? Most of us don't, I know. But some have a vision. Don't you agree, George? After all, if you can't add to a situation, you can always take away.
I'm not sure that I'm following you, Rose.
The 6 victims, George, they were the ones that made Gerald's life difficult. Is difficult even the right word? Would impossible be nearer the mark? I could imagine that, being in school, very few places to avoid them. Wherever he went, they'd follow him. Did he come to the conclusion that the only refuge could be, once they were no longer around to torment him? To their families, they were little cherubs, weren't they? Perfect under the sun, and beyond question the apples of their father's eyes, the pride of their mothers. But we both know how children are rarely like that, if indeed they ever were. They were nasty, spoilt thugs that liked to beat up on those weaker than themselves. Only Gerald saw a way to even out the score when your father took him to the archery club in an attempt to bring him out of himself. And Gerald took his revenge.
You could, and I'm sure you did, get all that off the internet. So you've read up on my family's past and discovered more than a few skeletons. Well, congratulations, Rosemary. Well done, bully for you. Yes, because of that day, everything changed for my family. My mother and father, they died that day, physically. Well, it took a decade. Mentally, I watched them age before my eyes. You know all about Gerald. Do you know anything about the victims? Robert Gower in Halbert Street, Michael Lovett on the playing fields by the school, Joseph O'Byrne, who was taking a smoke behind the bike sheds, Gareth Thompson and David Bedford, both on Pembroke Street, and lastly, Paul Bowerman on a stretch of wasteland by his father's allotment. Try and find a website dedicated to the victims. I have read so many experts that have gone over and over and over the events of that day. Never has even one of them talked about those that died. There are no books to the people chosen that day. No one has ever told their stories because they were chosen. It wasn't simply a case of who was available. The list was prepared and selected, and you know why no one ever writes about them? Because they had made Gerald's life a living hell. It was the only way. They terrorised the streets, the school, any club in the area that tried to do something new. They turned up and destroyed it. You think people are different today? People have always been the same the world over. Only now, the kids have nothing to do, no chance at all of entering the adult world because they are just not cheap enough. You think feral children are unique to these times? We had them in the 50s and the 60s. We have had them right across the years. The only difference, the adults hadn't yet learnt to send their kids' futures abroad under the banner of increasing the firm's profits. 50 years down the line, and you've riots on the streets. Only possible because the children no longer have to get up in the morning. And let me tell you something.
And 7.
What?
The 7th victim. Gerald.
Yes, you mentioned him before.
Not suicide.
I'm not sure that
I think you are. I think you've known from the beginning. Do you remember we talked about Joshua O'Byrne, that worked with your father in the coal mine?
Of course I remember.
Do you remember what they argued about?
Gerald had just...
No, not Gerald. They argued about you.